Yeah. Not sure I ever want to make another giant shoe again. Hi guys, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made the giant size walking boot for regatta. So how do we create a structure for something that's actually a pretty simple shape? We just need to get it all to the venue. Now, I've never had to make a giant shoe cake before. In fact, I don't even know if I've made a normal sized shoe cake before. But I started by tracing the shoe in the size that I wanted. So I used a projector and drew onto, not the wall directly, I bought some plain wallpaper. I have to do this in the hallway at work because there's no other bit of wall space that I can stick this on that's big enough. So yeah, I drew out the shoe for a template and also the sole. And then what I'm doing with the ruler here is I'm working out how many layers of cake will fit into it. Now, Regatta kindly sent me a shoe as well to work from. So it's never been worn, they just sent me the one shoe. But it just helped. So we cut out the sole in like thick base, and I did have to sort of make it a little bit taller. This whole base or sole, yeah, I did at the workshop at work, so we kept all of this out of the kitchen because there's a lot of wood and everything on here, stuff that I do not want to get into the cake itself. So once I kind of built this structure, which has like the little wooden pegs underneath, again, just for strength, because if I make any of this out of cake, it's just gonna kind of squash. But I'm gonna cover this sole in black, or it might have been like a really dark blue actually. I'm using modeling paste because again, it's really hard. I haven't worried about putting it on in one big piece because, to be honest, this is all underneath. You're not really going to see the underneath. It was more just so that it wasn't white if anybody kind of knelt down and tried to peek underneath the cake. So it is a bit scruffy under there, but it's fine. Need to put markings in there and make that bit a little bit neater. As you can see, doing my usual trick of not actually baking myself, not only because I'm really lazy, but I couldn't fit these size cakes into my oven. So I just bought these ready-made. So I've cut out the shape of what I think the shoe will look like from above. So starting with kind of the sole shape, I'm gonna cut out quite a few layers of this cake as well. But I do need to make sure the board and everything is clean and completely food safe first. So we're gonna make sure we cover up any nuts and bolts and all that internal structure. And then I'm gonna put a layer of buttercream on and then stick my first layer of sponge cake on. Now, because they're quite big layers, some of them did kind of break when I put them on, but it's fine because I just stuck them back together when they're in place. So I just carried on layering in between the buttercream and then more layers of the sponge cake. Constantly looking at my template. So you can see I put lines on there as to where each layer of cake, or where I thought each layer of cake would come up to, so that I could work out at what point I need to dowel it. So I'm just going to keep going a little bit longer. I had to have help holding some of the layers. So I am adding some cake cards in, so one at the top, one underneath, so that it's kind of food safe, top and bottom underneath that, so that the cake's not going to come into contact with the structure itself. So I'm just using like dowels, like hollow cake dowels to cover over that, and I'll just put more cake underneath that. So because the cake is quite big, it needs like a bit of support partway through, but only at that part, not the front, because the front is already at full height. Now, I covered it in plastic, by the way, in case you're wondering what I was doing. When I went to go work on something else for like half an hour because I didn't want the cake to go dry. So back on with this again. So continuously layering this up. I do keep using my template. You can see now I'm starting to use like the more cake offcuts as I'm getting a little bit closer to the top for these smaller bits. I think when I did my template, I must have squashed the cake or the shoe to be slightly shorter than it maybe should have been, but it's a short shoe. It's okay. Everybody was still happy with the shoe. So it's just really a case of carving it to shape, which actually took me a while. And then I covered it in a thin layer of buttercream. And then I also went over with ganache. Now, those of you that watch me regularly will know that often I will go over with ganache, especially on a big cake or something that's quite fancily shaped and needs that support, because ganache is much firmer than buttercream, or it sets much firmer. And sometimes cakes like this, where there's a lot of weight in them. So the tongue of the shoe is what I'm going to start with. I have put some wooden kebab skewers in there. They are food safe, just to hold it in place while I start working on it. No cake in the tongue part, just because it is so small that it wasn't really worth putting cake in that bit. So that's just like the icing, and it is mainly icing with some modeling chocolate mixed in. And I did try to texture it as well, so it would be a little bit more like the texture on the boot itself. And I tried to do it in pieces, so I'm constantly looking at that boot, which hasn't been worn, guys. I know I put it on my kitchen countertop. That is a brand new prototype boot, which I think is probably out now for sale, but at the time when I was making this, it wasn't. Using my template just to mark into the ganache where all these individual pieces want to go. For the text, my handwriting is not very good, so I've just kind of printed that off to the size I want and then kind of traced through a little bit and then gone over on the icing with an edible pen for that. Okay, so there's some bits that need to stick out a little bit more. I don't like adding a lot of fondant to it. I know you're all gonna be like disbelieving me because I put so much fondant on the cakes. Where bits are chunkier, I prefer to have cake, but for this bit, I didn't leave enough bulk, so I am having to kind of bulk out a little bit with fondant, just around that top bit of the shoe where the shoe kind of looks padded and puffy anyway. The bits that I did like the most were actually the details. So I love that we've got like texture in it. I just use like texture mats that I have in my drawer at work, and then the stitching piped on in royal icing. That's one of my favorite bits to do, I think. So again, just constantly rolling out all the different pieces, and at this point I have now cut up my template that I had made into smaller pieces. I feel like it's kind of a little bit like the pieces would actually be on the boot, like how it's made, but well, maybe not quite. I think it maybe wouldn't be quite so many small pieces, but some of it might be similar. So I have kept it thicker, the icing in the bits that need to look a bit more padded and puffy looking on the shoe. It actually took me quite a bit longer to make than I thought. I did work on this one overnight as well. There was no rest on this one with it having real cake in, and I knew that obviously when it's being eaten, you don't want to have the cake hanging around for too long. Once it is sealed in the ganache and the fondant, it's pretty airtight, so it does usually last a good few days without it going stale, but still, I wanted to just work on this one pretty non-stop. Most of my time actually went into planning, getting ready for this one, getting all my fondant colored to the colors that I want it. Usually I just buy fondant ready colored, but because it needed to be the same color as the shoe for this one, I had to color it, which took ages. So again, just looking at the shaped pieces that fit on the shoe and then adding them in the same shape to the fondant, pressing in nice and deeply around the edges anywhere where I want a stitching line. Cutting off any bits where I've added a bit too much. Again, more piping in the laces for detail. It is just royal icing that I'm using for this bit as well. Obviously, guys, if you are using royal icing, just check that anyone eating the cake is happy having egg whites as well, because that is usually in royal icing. Always worth letting people know if they are eating a cake. Okay, so let's get some more of their branding on with some lettering. I used a different texture mat for the black, or I don't know if it's black or dark blue actually, on the heel. I think it was actually a wood grain texture mat that I used for this. And then I'm going to cover up that seam that I've got on the back. Again, I had to mix some pretty bright yellow paste for this. I used modeling paste for this bit on the back because I didn't want the fondant, which is quite soft, to kind of flop off. So yeah, modeling paste on that little back bit. And the white lines I drew on were with an edible pen. I'm gonna have to go a little bit chunkier here with the paste for the bit that the laces go behind, the kind of hook bits. I don't know what you call them. And let's get some more detailing on down here. So the shoe had a bit of patterning down here. My lines are not very straight, how I freehanded it. And then the sole. So I left the sole till last. Now, again, it's fairly chunky was the sole. So I put the fondant on in pieces still again, but fairly thickly. Even the laces were quite thick on this one with it being so large. You can see my different dogs in the background. In fact, I think that might have been what I put this to one side to work on for a little bit. I was working on my dog class as well, which is an online class that I have. You guys can check that out over on my website. I'm actually really surprised I managed to get the yellow as bright as I did. So Regatta asked me not only for the giant shoe cake, but something for it to go on. Now I had some polystyrene left over from some of the stuff that I'd made from the cake shows. So I took a really large piece of that. I tried to cut it so it looked like a rock because I thought a rock or kind of ground would be nice, a nice look to put a shoe on. I did paint it. I just used normal paints. So I went to like a DIY shop and bought grey and green paints and painted it all and did airbrush some of it. Despite the base not being edible, I still sprinkled on edible soil because I wanted it to look good, but I also wanted something that if it did come into contact with the cake when we put the cake on there was still edible. I do have a video on making edible soil here on my YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that below the video. I think I know how to use it. I'm not sure where you're looking at though. So now we just need to get it all to the venue. I think I'll let the boys carry it. So the polystyrene base took up a lot of space. That just went in our van fine though, because it was nice and light to carry. And the shoe went by car because the car was much cleaner, and I had to wrap the shoe up as well for transporting. So that we got to the venue, we were put into a cupboard because the cake was a surprise and it was the only place they could hide us and the cake, where we put it together and I put on a bit more edible soil. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.